not showing us recording. Oh, yes, now it's showing us recording.
Yes, it is. Hopefully my ear doesn't turn off the Wi-Fi, as has been so common in recent times. So I won't touch my ear with the phone, which is probably for the best anyway. So, yes.
Yes. God, shouldn't touch air with phone. A phone is... It's crazy that they've made a phone with a design where it's actually not a good idea for your ears to touch the phone. That's
It's all intentional. I honestly feel like all this stuff is intentional. Like, they're experts at everything. It's just any little thing they can put in to A, irritate society, and B, so they can have an excuse to bring out iPhone number 573 or whatever model of brand you use. It's always some reason. Oh, people kept turning the Wi-Fi off with their ear. My bad. Buy the next model. Right? Sure.
Next model will be your fingers that turn it off.
Yeah, I was thinking like the other day. I mean, obviously there's so many things, but one of the main ones is like you have these phones where everything is just generally shit. Like, I've had a phone without a flashlight before, smartphone without a flashlight, something so basic as that. I've had a phone which the camera's a piece of shit, but meanwhile they've got biometric technology and everything, of course, because they want you to conform to a digital system. So that's something that costs a bloody fortune and is technical to implement, and yet they can't even put a fucking flashlight on the phone. But they have all this other crap which they don't tell people about. Of course, we're in the age where that's being pushed on us now everywhere. Every time I log in to a company, it's always, do you want your biometrics? Well, that's not going to last long. Soon it's going to be, in order to keep an account with our company, you need to have biometrics. Otherwise, you're welcome to withdraw all of your funds and fuck off. That's essentially what's happening. And we're going to see that. Probably already started to see that, to be honest. It just hasn't hit perhaps the UK yet. But no doubt that's a system in China and many other countries. And actually, recently I was in a backpacker place in Sao Paulo. This is fucking insane. This hostel, you had to use your fingerprints to get in and out of the building, which doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever. A, because they had a 24-hour reception, and B, what the fuck? Like, you're giving your data to some random independent hostel in Sao Paulo, that your fingerprints are the most important thing that there is. It's your digital footprint. Literally, it is your footprint. Assuming we are not biological beings.
It's like your DNA almost, isn't it? In fact, it's more original than your DNA. Like, people can have the same DNA, but people can't have the same fingerprint.
Exactly, and that's why they want to. That's why they want to. Once I actually had to give my fingerprints when I was a very young child. This is insane. So I refused to give my fingerprints since then, consciously. But when I was younger, I went to a kind of like prep school, and we were 7, 8 years old, children. They gave us credit cards at the school because it was a fancy school. So they gave us like a top-up card where your parents would put cash on, and then as an 8-year-old with no understanding of finance, you would go to the lunch canteen where you had all kinds of tuck shops, with all sweets and all that kind of stuff, and no notion of how much stuff cost. And kids were just fucking swiping away their parents' money. But then they implemented a fingerprint scan, and this is back in 1998.
Jeez.
My fingerprint scan for children, 1998. It's fucking insane. Yeah, completely insane. And since then I refused, but recently, it wasn't actually on this phone, it was on my phone that was stolen in Peru. And if anyone wants to listen to that podcast, I think it's one of the episodes because it's quite funny. I put my phone my finger on the actual fingerprint button, just because that's where you sometimes hold the phone, and it buzzed my finger. And I swear on my fucking life, I was jabbed, like someone needled me in the finger. That's what it felt like. It is the first time I'd ever used that since I was like 8 years old. It was a complete accident, and it buzzed my finger, like buzzed it. Like, what the fuck? Like, really, almost like seared off a bit of skin, like a red hot burn kind of scenario. Yeah, it's insane, man. It's fucking insane.
It's like static on steroids.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff doesn't really bother me in essence because they have access to all this information regardless. I just don't do it on principle. But I mean, realistically, they have everything. They are the system.
Fingerprint, they've only got if you've been involved in criminal stuff. But other than that, but DNA they've got for everyone for sure.
No, I think they've got everything. I honestly think they've got fingerprint scanners as well. Like, if you think every time you use your phone, what is it? It's a touch screen. like the idea they haven't implemented.
Yeah.
It's
Fair.
scanning
That's
at all points. Every time you go to a printer at work, the photocopier, you put the paper in. Who fucking knows? They're probably scanning off your fingerprints off the paper that you touched in the machine. It's all a fucking scam, and it's all to push people into a box and dilute society into something that's predictable. Essentially, we are the most valuable commodity is analytics, right? And we are walking analytics. Everything that we do, we're literally slaves that can be sold left, right, and center. And that is really the ultimate, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Begins with A. Example is another adjective. What's the word? Doesn't matter. But essentially, we're in a sheep pen. And that's what we're comparable to livestock, penned into a system that we believe reaches its extent in a spherical globe spinning through space at how many fucking billions
which
hours.
moves us into one of our topics, episode 22.
We live in a fucking dome. Assuming that's as close to the system that's true. A dome surrounded by ice, which is either natural or artificially implemented as a form of fence to keep us penned into a ring where we can be monitored and analysed, and the data can be literally sold, though not in a monetary system, but sold to the highest bidder for the development of the next set of protocols and the next, fenced-in pen in the other side of the universe, wherever that may be. But anyway, before we tangent, which we should be doing because it's good, should we introduce the episode?
Yes. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 22 of JJTalks. We're here to talk again, give you perspective, share our alternative, honest, and mostly truthful views on things.
Yeah, I mean, I would change it slightly and say everything we say is 100% true.
I mean, well, we've had a couple of, there are some subjective things, i.e., the veracity of child, prodigies and stuff like that, and so some of it's philosophical, but in terms of factual truths, and I mean, a lot of it is truth. A lot of it, I would say, is truth, but there certainly is some that is subjective or that we cannot prove. But this stuff that we're talking about now is absolutely provable. Absolutely. We live inside a firmament, inside a dome, with an ice rink surrounding it, and you can't get out. Like like above us is like waters. Like we can't get out of this space. The whole space system's fake. The whole space program's fugazi and is used for money laundering, and that's just openly apparent.
Should we begin with, just because I love this subject because it's so it's just so decipherable for most people. The way that they name victims and assailants in theatrical news cases. And what's the most recent one? Oh, before we start the most recent, actually, introduce, if you can, and I'm asking you because I forgot the names, the cases that we discussed before in our previous podcast. So with respect to the so-called murder victim that was a transgender and whose name happened to be Brianna Gay. That is. At the exact same time, there was a murdered lady. I can't remember what the context of that case was, but all of these were in the news at the exact same time in the UK. Her name happened to coincidentally be Gaylord. So we have a homosexual transgender whose name happens to be gay. Pretty rare, but okay, with that. The exact same time, there's another murder victim whose name is Gaylord. At the exact same time, there's a drowned asylum seeker whose name was, what was his name?
Was it something dingy or something?
No, it's like Habibi. So in Arab culture, Habibi means woman, and it's also a term used to describe homosexual men. And that was his name. It was something along the lines of that, like
Bibi.
Bibi.
That was it. I was thinking about dingy.
So that's three. And then what was the fourth one? It was something to do with a murdered child. Oh, it was the boy. the boy that was raped and killed, or he went missing. What was his name? It was like Bumboy or something. I can't remember that. We should be keeping track of these.
Oh, Batty. Wasn't it
Batty Boy. His name was Batty, and in English, Batty is another word for homosexual. It's a word used.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have 4 murder victims in the news at the exact same time in the space of a week. All of their surnames relate to homosexuality. What a coincidence that is. And this is where we're going to introduce more comedy to the equation. And the 5th one wasn't in the news at that time, but it was the former British chief of police, who is a female. She is a lesbian. That's pretty rare to become the #1 police officer in the UK. Guess what her name was, public? Guess what her name was? Her name was, what was it, James?
Cressida Dick.
Dick. Her name was Dick.
Cressida Dick.
So her lesbian female surname is Penis, and she was the former head of the police department for, was it the Metropolitan Police or
It is the Met.
For being a bunch of Freemasonic occultists, pedophile Epstein Island goers. And then the new victim, James, is the new...
a few commissioners before that, just to expound on Cressida Dick, you had Sir Paul Condon, which, obviously sounds very much like condom. But yeah, most recently, there's this case that was in Victoria, the Victoria state of Australia. And I mean, once again, the names in this are just like fantastic. So I believe that the guy who was driving the lorry that hit the police people was Movinder Singh, as in mow down. And the guy who the police had pulled over at the time was called Richard Pussy. Now, what's short for Richard?
Dick.
There you go. So it's like...
And people believe this. People believe it. Everything's fake. Everything's fake. And it's so obvious.
The video, albeit very graphic. I don't know if the video is like kind of like on that kind of viral. And it shows, rest in peace to these people and their families. But the video seems a bit bizarre. The placement of the way that people are behaving to these so-called mutilated bodies seems like, I don't know, that they almost seem inhuman. Like, oh, look, there's one over here. Oh, is he dead? Oh, I think 2 of them, like, all 4 of them are like mush, and like I think 2 of them are dead. And then you've got like this guy Richard Pussy just like walking around the lorry, like filming these police, saying, "Oh yeah, well, you shouldn't have fucking pulled me over, should you? Going 149 kilometers an hour." And that's the video. The video lasts I think the video lasts 1 minute 11 seconds as well, which is 111, which is 3. But yeah, it's an interesting case. So apparently Malvinder Singh, 4 policemen died. I believe the incident was in February. I could be mistaken. Or maybe the judgment was made in the case in February, where 4 police officers in the Victoria state of Australia were, mown down by this lorry driver. Malvinder Singh, and Dick Pussy was the person who had been pulled over, who was apparently high on some kind of drug. It wasn't alcohol. Apparently, he tested positive for drugs, and they called in another unit to come in to see where to assist with the arrest and maybe go from the evidence. And that's when Movinder mowed them down.
There's also so Movinder was the driver.
Yes, he was the driver of the lorry. Yeah.
So I just thought it was on about right. So just to reiterate, there's also another way you could decipher his surname. So we have 4 police officers. I don't believe any of this happened, by the way. That's my opinion. Though if it did happen, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one origin for their deaths, and that is Masonic ritual practice. So an example would be Blackfriars Bridge in London, which for those of you who aren't from London or aware, it's just a big bridge, quite a famous bridge. Now, Blackfriar is it's essentially how Masons dress to this day during their ritual practices. It derives from a Spanish Inquisition. I don't believe it's the Spanish Inquisition as such, i.e. because they were wearing kind of white capes like the Ku Klux Klan. But it was a form of dress used by Spanish friars. And the name is named after that, Blackfriars, because it was synonymous with where you would kill Freemasons. And there's a number of Freemasons that have been found hung to death, of course, branded as suicides from that bridge. And you would do it to set an example. So just like any fraternity or network, when you join the cult, you adhere to the principles of said cult, and there are punishments as outlined in all kinds of books, including, what's the guy's name, James? The famous Mason.
Alistair Crowley?
Not Alistair Crowley, though he is one of them. There's a book on Mason. I always forget the name. It doesn't really matter. But anyway, there are punishments for certain behaviors, and the ultimate betrayal, said punishment is death, and such people will be hung from Blackfriars Bridge. So when you see things like 4 police officers dying, and you've got individuals essentially mocking them, that's how the story is presented. The context of the story is, I mean, it's fake enough. As just to reiterate, you've got a driver whose name is Mo, and as James correctly said, Mo is to mow down, to run people over. His surname is Singh, though you could also pronounce it Singe. So Singh would, and singe is to skin off essentially the flesh from the bone, which is what would happen if you're getting run over by a fucking 10-ton truck. So we've got 4 police officers that get run over whilst detaining a man called Richard Pussy. In English, Richard means dick, so his name is actually Dick Pussy. The driver's called Mo Singh, and the 4 police officers were squashed into oblivion. And it could just be that they were, because to be a police officer in most places in the world, you have to be a Freemason. That's an objective fact, just like the military, whether it's the Air Force, the Navy, British Army, anywhere in the world. After a certain rank, you are a part of some sort of network. And perhaps they betrayed that network, or perhaps they were investigating, perhaps they were kind of, they were outcasts and they were actually honest. Either way, the deaths aren't, they're portrayed in a way that's fictional, and I still believe that they didn't happen at all. It's essentially, it's like a threat, it's a mock, whatever you want to brand it as. It's there to jest, would be the correct word, at the public or certain individuals that are going to be seeing such a story. But isn't it fantastic? Isn't it just fantastic how people don't see this? Everything is passed across as a coincidence.
It's like, I think the thing is that once your eyes are opened to, let's just say, more obvious truths, it then kind of allows you to see more less obvious truths. And the problem is that people are still, en masse running around, getting jabbed and getting their kids jabbed. So it's like, what hope do they have? What hope do they have of, seeing things that may be less obvious? It's mad. It's mad. We live in a fucking crazy world. We live in a world where, as you said, you just told me earlier on that the NHS, allowing men, men who say that they're women, and then it's just saying that, they can produce breast milk that's of equal quality to, a child. It's yeah.
I've got the quote here now. Literally, so this is from February 18th. An NHS, this is sources Telegraph. An NHS trust has said that breast milk produced by trans women, there is no such thing as a trans woman, there is a man, period.
Yes, exactly.
For a sign of birth, because it's a man, this is so ridiculous, at birth is as good for babies as that produced by a biological woman. An NHS trust has said that men can produce the same quality breast milk to feed children, which aren't theirs because men can't have children, as biological women. It's insane. But of course, this is one of billions of things. There's actually I think a lot of people know this channel, but I don't know if you follow it, James. I actually unsubbed from it just because I don't like being subscribed to all this negative stuff, because it's, it's just not helpful. But it's called Clown World, and it's a British guy actually.
Yep.
And it's just essentially a rotation of just clips, news clips, highlight the absurdities of society and where we're progressing, that being an oxymoron term, because obviously we're not progressing, we're declining and regressing. But that's just one of a billion in the last year alone. Every day the man's posting hundreds of these on his feeds. And it's just unbelievable what society has come to, how beta people are, how weak they are, how subservient they are, how incapable they are of thinking for themselves. They are scum, and then they are the origin of global demise and their own demise, which they blame on the strong because they are parasites and cockroaches. And what weak people do is they try and suck the energy from those that don't require others to sustain their existence. Independent characters and independent mindsets are the real fighters of this world, and the individuals that are essentially the absolute truth and the only mechanism for returning society, if indeed such as possible, to a status quo, to an equilibrium that doesn't pertain to death, destruction, and animosity against all else other. There we go. That was a little rant. I put it out.
Amen. Fuck them.
Exactly.
Fuck them and their men's fucking milk. How can it be as good? Just ridiculous. Absolutely fucking ridiculous. So, I mean, something else that we touched on, it's like, I mean, we don't know exactly the state of mind of the people that are listening to us, but or what their views are on, global geology. But it's like, have you ever heard of magnetic water? Like, water that kind of sticks to things that are magnetic. Like, is water a metal? Because last time I knew, magnets attracts metals, right? That's what magnets do. But we live on, this ball that's 70% water, allegedly. Allegedly we live on a ball, and we have this magnetic core that attracts everything to it. So we have this force called gravity that keeps everything grounded. But if it's magnetism or if gravity is a derivative of Earth's magnetism, then like, why would water obey it? Because water is not metallic. Water is hydrogen and 2 parts of oxygen, which, essentially are gases. But when you mix them together, it creates a liquid, which gives us aqua. It's absolutely bizarre. And water in any kind of container has a completely flat level when it's still. So what is this force that makes it bend or arc, which cannot be replicated on a short scale? So only 8 gazillion trillion Google tons of water will bend, but you can't make a liter of water bend in a bottle. It makes no fucking sense. And this is the sort of bullshit that we are, brainwashed with, from birth. And people don't question the status quo, even though we see them, bombing and killing and invading, countries under false pretenses, things that are even officially, proven to be true. We just go the Gulf War II, weapons of mass destruction, etc., proven not to be there, millions killed. Just one, small example, not to mention all the other things that, we've seen our leaders do over the course of history that make no sense, lockdowns that made no sense, etc. The list goes on and on. And we actually listen to this nonsense. But if you can show me a real picture of something ascended into space, a video ascended into outer space, or water bending, be my guest, because no such things exist. No such things exist. It's absolutely 100% provable that no such things exist. And I implore any listener that believes in these fallacies to prove that they're not. And through doing that, you'll find that what I'm saying is correct. Because, it's people don't always accept things readily. It's like there's a lot of programming to be undone. You need to like deprogram yourself. You need to like decode this reality that we live in. The headlines, the puns, the symbology, all of this esoteric stuff, and then the facts that are just incorrect as well. Mathematics, Pythagoras's rule itself, mathematics, which is one of the pure things, which is one of the things that that doesn't lie. Maths doesn't lie in the sense of the rules of maths don't change. The rules of maths have never changed in my lifetime, and they can be used to look at things in a geometric sense. And it's funny that geology and geometry have a similar. There's probably mockery in the etymology of that as well. But you can use geometry to show that using Pythagoras' rule on curvature, and there are things that can be seen in sight clearly on the same longitude that should be invisible, and behind the curve that should be hundreds of feet below any alleged curvature. That's my rant done on that.
Well, no, I mean, but it's absolutely right, and you can look at it on a kind of microcosm in that you can tell people that 1 + 1 is 1, but if the status quo is pumping billions of dollars in revenue to a marketing ploy to convince people that 1 + 1 is you can convince people that 1 + 1 is
3.
You have if you have a multi-billion-dollar marketing ploy to tell people that 1 + 1 is 3, then people are going to believe the latter. And often people are aware that it's not the correct answer, but people are so submissive and reliant on conforming to a social pattern or a social order because they're not independent enough to think for themselves, because again they've been molded into a society as a consequence of their parents and their upbringing, descended through their grandparents and their ancestors in bygone years, that it's an inherited kind of discipline of objective weakness. It's a betaism that's passed on through the genes, through just inherited memory, through again just environmental conditioning for the most part. Whereas where if you watch someone having the shit kicked out of them on the street, most people, irrespective if they've got a chance to actually change that without getting hurt themselves, a good person should step in some way, whether it's calling the police, whether it's trying to distract the assailants, or whether it's just going full blown into the equation and hoping not to get fucking stabbed or slashed up. But now we live in a society where people stand readily by with a camera phone because they think they're going to get YouTube hits, because it's about social popularity. It's about winning in the social margins, just like people changing their Facebook profile pictures to a LGBT flag or a Palestinian flag or this kind of thing. They only ever do things when it's trending and when it's fashionable to take the correct stance. Whenever they're the minority, but where the context is still as correct, people will not step in because it's not in their social interest to step in. It's not in their survival interest to step in because they know they're going to lose. They might lose a job if they say that there's no such thing as anything other than men and women. They might lose a job if they say it's totally not acceptable for a man to compete in female football or a man to compete in the female Olympic team, or for a man with a penis to be in a changing room with 13-year-old girls, which for our listeners we touched on, I believe, last episode. It's totally acceptable and legal in international swimming competitions now for so-called transgender men to have their cocks out in a changing room with female children. It is absolutely accepted. And on camera, I can't remember the name, the head of whatever swimming league is responsible, whatever committee, he says openly that it's absolutely fine. And he thinks it's fine for a man with more testosterone to compete against women and for there to be no objective advantage to the men, even though they seem to be winning every single race. If we look at college sports in the US, which is almost at the same level as, international kind of Olympic, it's international Olympic level essentially. A lot of athletes in the US college scene end up becoming national champions or in the international arena. And yeah, I mean, women are getting destroyed, as you'd expect, by men because they have more testosterone. So, when you give people these kinds of scenarios and they still refuse to accept something as basic as that, there is absolutely no chance that you can provide them with even the most simple scientific, and I say scientific in inverted commas because science itself is a brand utilized by the status quo to diminish our understanding of spiritualism and energies and all these kind of factors which play an equally scientific role in how this world is organized, operated, and founded. But in terms of basic scientific protocols that they adhere to, we can provide those protocols and destroy their own arguments. And yet people still turn around and say, I would rather believe the Nike advert, which has men with fucking vaginas and women with penises competing against kids. They would prefer that because it's in their social interest, because they're weak specimens and they can't do anything else unless they stood around 100 persons with the same narrative. No one wants to be the lone wolf. And that's the problem. They teach children from day one that being the lone wolf is not acceptable. It isn't character building when it's exactly the opposite approach. People should be trained to be self-reliant, and social is just a natural intrinsic part of that independence and self-reliance. You command more respect from it. We live in a pyramid system, just like all animal creatures, where by the laws of logic, the strongest character in all spheres should be leader of the pack. But masonry, occultism, reverses standardized natural protocols because they derive from the creator, whatever that creator may be. For some people, it's God. For others, it's something else. But it's the natural law. And they hate the notion of the natural law because they aim to diminish, destroy, and reverse it for their own gain so that they, as weak pedophile creatures, can attain the top position in this pyramid. They end up being emperor, king, sultan. They become the leaders of the pack. Realistically, the betas, the weak scumbags in society, should be at the bottom. And that's where they deserve to be because they haven't earned their place or position.
Absolutely. And they're also the vast minority, which is more of a reason why they should be at the bottom. I mean, people of more sound spirit, although not of more sound character or strength, but people that don't have the same maybe satanic inclinations as them, there's a lot more of us than them. They make up maybe, I don't know, 1% at best, and and we're the 99%. They show you who they are because their Baphomet, their symbol, the guy that the deity that they worship has boobs. It's an animal with boobs because they're basically fucking animals, and and they're and boobs kind of show they're weak. They're not men. And we're not to say that women are weak. I think it's more of a sign of the physicality. Like they operate like snakes, hence they worship reptilians as well a lot. They operate in like the snaky shadows and, very sneaky, very androgynous, and taking away the humanity and the strength that there is within the individual sexes. Their aim is to blend humans and animals and blend males and females and, just stop things having the pure natural strength that the creator intended them to have.
Absolutely, because humanity is the equilibrium deriving from the creating source. And naturally, order through chaos is, not pun intended, but it's quite appropriate. That slogan is the kind of motif, if you like, of Freemasonry in the occultist world, and that's why they worship people like the Baphomet, which are of course are androgynous creatures, because humanity as a derivative of what should be and what is more right, not saying anything is absolutely right, but it should be the best possible creation, the possible version that the creator had to offer, is something that completely fails to represent the evils of this world, the people that don't desire to conform to patterns of good and morality and, as much selflessness as possible. Although, of course, everything is a self-interested act. That doesn't mean self-interested acts can't be positive. That's what I meant.
Yeah, exactly. So if we
but
just
instead,
use, the terms given to us as defined in terms of standardized English, when we refer to self-interest, selflessness, and all these sorts of things, we're just using the standardized English terms, in regards to reference. Anyway, sorry to interject.
No, that's right, absolutely. Because I mean, I guess the purpose of philosophizing is to challenge, or the purpose of discussion, period. Purpose of language is to, mold a more appropriate language. And of course, that is a very subjective term, and we've seen perfect example of how they are literally changing language as a mechanism to mold society in a way that's not beneficial to the vast majority of people, but only beneficial to themselves. So that's why language is an ever-changing a pattern of energies and ideas. And of course, I would have, and we've debated this already in a previous podcast, I would debate the meaning of self-interest and selflessness and all these kinds of things. But just for the purpose of simplifying this podcast, these terms we can align to goodness as a kind of overarching banner, and everything that they stand for is against that, and is against the equilibrium which had been around for probably a very, very long time before the corruption started to ensue and evil started to prevail. But that's the ultimate duality. And I guess, it's kind of difficult not to philosophize and not go down the rabbit hole of sometimes, as we're often told, it's good to have bad because bad contextualizes the good. How are you recognize good if you don't have something worse to separate yourself from? Yeah, it's one of those mad, never-ending conversations. But I would say, James, that recently, I won't name them, but there's not too many podcasts I watch now. There's not too many videos I kind of am interested by, mainly because it's, the same kind of topics that are spouted out time and time again. It's almost just a kind of cycle of the same, I'm not going to say shit, but of the same kind of words. But what I really detest, actually, as much as it's good from time to time to be healthy and I guess try as best as one can to investigate the origin of all, it has to be within limits. It has to be confined within practicality, because there's no purpose of conversation unless said conversation can be applied to better the world. So all of these philosophers, whether it's Nietzsche or Heidegger or whatever, we're given these examples in school, which I think is a bad thing, because of course the school system is operated by the people that want to kind of decimate society, and the fact that they're providing goes to show that they recognize that there is no benefit to providing them. Otherwise, they wouldn't provide them. Of course, anything that's really beneficial, that's going to better people as a whole, they refuse to, let's say, sprinkle into the curriculum.
Absolutely.
Medicine being a prime example of that. So I think when we philosophize, we aim, I hope, to try and utilize that as a mechanism to find a better pathway or lifestyle for others. Whereas I've recognized in other people's channels recently, they're just philosophizing for the sake of philosophizing, and there's no fucking point to it. And they're using words that most people can't understand. And not to say that it's a bad thing for people to, try and be grammatically correct and to try and provide the best word for the occasion. I'm not saying that at all. I respect the fact that, there's language out there which, is adhering to the correct, whether it's English or the correct Spanish or the correct Portuguese, the way it was written a long time ago before society declined. Unfortunately, the problem with that now is society has declined so much that using the kind of fancification of words just rejects the kind of the purpose of your discussion, which should be to better society. If people can't understand what people are saying, then what's the fucking point in using these kinds of words? It's almost like an ego thing. So that's why I'm rejecting deep philosophy, and hopefully we can instead kind of, for the audience, try our best to give people examples of the way they need to go.
Yeah, or if one is going to go down like a philosophical wormhole, it should be, expressed in layman's terms, or it just needs to be palatable for everybody.
Perfectly put. I agree. So where are we going to go now with the topic? Shall we move into the old world, trees and
right. So what was the name of that guy? The one that was looking into the rocks? Because I mean, Yes, stellium, right. So each gem called stellium, and like pebbles always fascinated me. Like, and they fascinate a lot of children. And you know, like when you was a kid, like, oh, I like this smooth pebble. And you remember you used to take the pebble home with you, or you'd play at the beach, you collect pebbles, and you'd look at them, and you know, you just kind of just wondered, okay, like how are these things formed? You know, what are they? And I'm just going to cut to the chase here. Stellium opened my eyes to the fact that, and this is before we get to, you know, the trees, but a lot of the things that we call stones, especially the smooth round pebbles, you notice that they all have kind of indentations in like the same kind of way. They're all similar shapes with similar proportions. And then like yeah, and when you crack them open, you realize that wow, they're a different color on the inside and now on the outside. And then you learn about what petrification is, and then you learn about the anatomy of certain organs inside the body and their makeup, and you realize that it's very possible that these things that we call pebbles or stones, you know, in some cases rocks, are actually petrified organs. And, you know, next time you see like a nice, smooth, you know, maybe fist sized pebble, I can guarantee you it's going to have 3 indentations on it because every single one of them do that match the ventricles on hearts and kidneys. And ventricles is basically veins or like carrier tubes in and out of, you know, said organ, but specifically kidneys and hearts, because that's what I believe most of them are. And that's a very interesting start into the old world in terms of the life that lived there. But in terms of, let's say, mammalian or humanoid, you know, life and potentially, you know, what happened there. If you'd like to talk about, you know, yeah, the trees and the silica era and the carbon era, you know, you can yeah maybe break that down a little bit more for our listeners.
I wish I had the terminology to break that down. But no, the only thing I would interject with slightly is I don't think it was every stone. I don't think every stone showed the signs, but that isn't to say that every stone didn't at some point show the signs. I guess, you know, through erosion and this kind of stuff and wear through water and wind and whatnot, certain stones are more distinct than others as a consequence of preservation.
Absolutely.
But I do believe
Look,
that all matter is organic. So there's this idea that somehow rock is kind of like, you know, sometimes they say, okay, well, all rock is, you know, compacted. It's compacted, you know, stones and organic matter and all this kind of stuff. Or if it's granite, it's, you know, something else. But realistically, all this stuff comes from trees and it comes from organs and it comes from, you know, a decomposing, living aura, for lack of a better term. And I think, you know, in fact, today I had a push notification on my phone from some fucking media source. They found the oldest woodland, historical woodland or whatever, and it's just this kind of desolate rockscape, which is exactly what Stellium talked about and what we've known for a long time. It's just occasionally they sprinkle a bit of truth in there. And no doubt 100 years from now, when we're all dead and everybody is an almost living cyborg, then they come out and say, oh, by the way, we've just discovered actually all rock is actually, you know, decomposed cedar tree or woodland forest and all this kind of stuff.
yeah.
But with respect to the rocks, what's quite interesting is this is a nice little transition into something that was brought up, which is, I guess, the kind of the pinnacle of thought now in the present, you know, given that what we see is becoming so blatant even for the untrained eye. The bunker system, and I'm going to link this into the stones because it's quite interesting, but stones, as we know, a lot of them are organs. It's an objective fact. I mean, Stellium's proven that with, you know, I think he himself he's not a cardiologist as such, but he's a chiropractor and he studied medicine. He was supposedly a computer hacker, though I do have a lot of qualms about the authenticity of him. Usually what they do, assuming that he's not authentic, and it saddens me to say that, but you have to be very cautious about, you know, trusting certain characters. They give you a lot of truth and then they somehow throw in a kind of a false leg to misdirect people. But at the same time, they've had their mockery. They've given people the light, but then they've shadowed it with the darkness. Regardless, he does objectively or prove, it would seemingly prove that our notions of what these stones are in terms of like standardized geology or geological practice is false. But the notion of what might be happening soon has come to mind, I believe, with ourselves quite often in previous podcasts about how they're going to eradicate humanity. You know, is it going to be a natural cataclysm solely, or is it going to be a combination of what they can accurately predict to be a natural cataclysm and then they finish us off with drones, War of the World style? I think the bunkers thing has been a fascination for a long time for many people, and I know I was fascinated by it a long time ago. And it's perhaps one of the main origins of my interest in this kind of subject, which is often, you know, regarded as kind of conspiratorial theory. But bunkers have been constructed for a hell of a long time. I mean, the number of bunkers that exist is beyond comprehension for most people. And a lot of these bunkers are even semi-abandoned now. A lot of them are financial scam projects during the Soviet time, the Cold War, that kind of, you know, that division between East and West. A lot of military budget was used to enrich a new layer of subservient occultist practitioners. And you've got channels like Action Adventure Twins, and they explore caves and they explore, you know, underground essentially infrastructure. And even recently there was a story which I shared with you, James, about the tunnels under Liverpool, you know, supposedly used to store goods during the Industrial Revolution. Then of course we have the tunnels that are apparently to be constructed between southern Spain and Morocco, a 17-mile underwater tunnel, which, let's be honest, it probably already exists. And what they do, and what was discussed yesterday in a podcast by I forget his name, it's the Christian chap that talks about monkey suits, or how a lot of animals.
The channel's like called RTKOFFIAH. It's got like a weird.
It's a strange name. He was saying about how actually a lot of these tunnels, which I absolutely believe, already existed. And I mean, of course they did. I mean, we've already discussed how impossible and unfeasible it is, rather, for all of this ancient architecture to have been constructed in so-called ancient times by populations that were barely a few million in each and every said region. Continents contained less than 100 million. And yet we're told that all of these people, without electronic tools, without advanced engineering, without so-called education and understanding for the most part of mathematics, which was saturated and consolidated within a small clique of individuals, we're told that the general population was able to construct things like Machu Picchu, the pyramids, all at the same time, thousands of castles in Spain and Portugal alone, all kinds of things that are completely hidden to this day. And at the same time, they were fighting, they were dying from disease, they were harvesting, they were hunting, they were doing all the other things societies have to do. And it's just completely impossible. It's completely impossible and impractical. So when we look at these bunkers, many of them already exist because they've been used in a previous time, because every single reset is the same system. It's just following each reset, they push to the plinth of society a new race or a new culture. And that's how they keep the eternal division going. At one point it was the Africans, at another point it was the Chinese, at another point it was the Persians. It's been recently the Europeans. Every time there's a reset, they reuse and may indeed add, if necessary, new infrastructure for the safeguarding of their disciples, their occultist disciples, their family, all these individuals. And then of course, when everyone else is wiped out, they're replaced. And I'm not going on a tangent, I'm going to link that in now. So it's the wiping out and the pebbles, which I find fascinating. So assuming these things are all, and assuming there is an actual cataclysm and they need to, deface the rest of humanity and, to mop up the survivors, or perhaps if there is no natural cataclysm and it's all artificially inseminated via weaponry, which I also believe are very much a kind of Fallout scenario, reference to a famous video game there. Will be a kind of scenario where we are, what's the word? Not obliterated, dissolved, a bit like Hiroshima, right? With an atom bomb. People are literally melted. People are just returned to nothing. And what is left is the body fat. What happens when a body is thrown into a crematorium? What happens when temperatures are so high in some instances during accidents or during industrial panic? Chernobyl, one such example. People literally melt, and what you're left with is blobs. of fat. And what else is similar to a blob of fat? Well, it's tree sap. And what is one of the most expensive jewels and aesthetic materials used in the construction of jewelry to this day, which exists sizably off the coast of Scandinavia and actually northern Poland, Gdansk and Gdynia, and that is, and I literally just had the name on the tip of my tongue and I've just forgotten it, amber. That's it. And amber is essentially just a condensed, it's tree sap, supposedly we're told. But when you think of stones and pebbles, they're all the same shape. You pick up a piece of amber, it's a nice smooth thing, just like a pebble. Aesthetically, it's shinier. But what if all of these pebbles, which were organs at some point, I think stellium goes into the technicalities as to why everything else has disappeared in the kind of in the body, if you like, and we're left with just the organs. And it is to do with kind of a form of petrification and that application onto certain aspects of the human biological framework. But what if all of these pebbles are just blobs of fat and organ, the leftover material from a...
Could I add to that? Because that's really interesting. So obviously, I speak a bit of the German language, and the word for amber in German is Bernstein, and that translates as burn stone. So if there was, let's just say, an event, a nuclear event, or some kind of incendiary event, or the reset, if there were high temperatures involved in, a previous reset, that would essentially, melt things down, and especially if, just say, before we lived in a different, because there were different life forms of, without going, okay, so there's lots of, we currently live in a carbon age. Carbon is the base of everything, and we can go back in numerology, but carbon has 6 atoms, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons, and that's linked into the whole kind of fascination with 666 and it being the number of the beast, because essentially when things were condensed and we fell from the silica realm to the carbon realm, where in the silica realm it's trees were enormous. They could have been a mile high. You had humans were larger, everything was bigger, everything's got a different form, things were more crystalline. And something that we objectively know today is that things with crystal give off higher frequencies, and you can use crystals for things objectively. So when this event happened, potentially a nuclear event, or something, some kind of explosion or implosion, things reached a high heat. Like I said, these people that were maybe more silica, maybe had more crystalline, blood and more crystalline organs. That would explain these rocks that we get. So you'll see, for instance, a grey pebble, which has an exterior, that you've seen a pebble that's been cracked open before, and it's got a grey, kind of outline. Then it has a slight white layer, and then it has this amber color in the middle. The bernstein, the burned stone, the burnstone, the stone that's been created from burns, and burn actually translates as burn in German as well, or Brenner, which is an anagram of burn, which is BRENNE, or burn, which is BERN, but it contains the same letters. And once again, none of this is coincidence, and not to mention that the actual Illuminati started in Germany, in Bavaria, as far this modern phase in 1776, which also equals 93. If you turn 17 plus 76 is 93. Turn the 6 upside down, you got 6 times 6, 3 6s. That could be chopped up many ways. I'm sure you guys could do basic arithmetic. But I find it really interesting that amber, that you speak about amber, and amber in German is Bernstein. And, Germany's a country that kind of goes under the radar a little bit. When people think about superpowers, they think about England and America and, but Germany sometimes goes on under, the radar. But Germany's the number one economy in Europe, which, a lot of people outside of the economic sphere do not know. They probably would assume that maybe the UK was, or I don't know, maybe Russia. But Germany is a absolute, economic, powerhouse, and the home and headquarters is an important HQ of the status quo. So yeah, quite fitting that their word for amber is that, and maybe gives more veracity to your premise on the sap and the formation of said gems.
Indeed, and actually, I was just looking at exploring Germany more, but I think it's going to require a very large podcast because
in fact, you're going to Bavaria soon, which is the home of
I'm going to Munich in 5 days. Not for long. Coincidentally, it's St. Patrick's Day, and I'm hosting a couch surfing event there, and it was the most cost-effective flight from Salvador, where I am now. No, it will be. It's it is an interesting place, and it is a topic, of course, given the First and Second World War alone, just like many countries, that it will command its own kind of feat of exploration, which will probably take up more than a single episode. But for now, to keep people on the edge of their seats, I guess, a little bit, and as we're approaching that perfect 60-minute mark, let's save the rest for the next podcast so we can continue
to plan.
Sounds like
a plan to me.
Yeah, keep it fresh, not bore people for too long, keep it interesting, keep the sparks flowing. There were certainly sparks thousands of years ago, no doubt, with these wild trees, as depicted in Avatar and all kinds of movies, because of course the states always talk about, they like to mock people and they like to tell you what it is they're doing, because it's an insurance policy. They always make you take responsibility for the kind of idiotic acts and the farce that the world has. They never lie, in essence. The mockers lie. They give you all the information. It's up for the public, i.e. ourselves, to decode the truth. But they never lie. Everything is voluntary at the end of the day. You don't have to drink water with fluoride. You don't have to feed your children McDonald's. You don't have to slurp away on Coca-Colas every day, destroying your insides. No one forces people to do that. They do it themselves. Then they get sick and they blame the status quo for it. And of course, the status quo are evil, manipulative wretches, above all cockroaches imaginable, the super cockroach, if you like. But people don't take responsibility for their actions. And I think we should explore the lack of responsibility with respect to investigating people's own pasts, the origin of what we are, next week. And perhaps we can save Germany for another time, or if we have time, continue on there. So, yeah.
It's been a pleasure. Episode 22. Love that number. On a cusp as well. It's also the cusp of my birthday too. So that's something I'll be looking forward to. But yes, we shall see you at episode 23.
Yep, see you on episode 23. All the best, everyone. Bye.
Au revoir.